Cartels, cops, and corruption. Hi, my name is Ross McLean. I'm former law enforcement and a former bodyguard to billionaires. And I want to talk to you about the corruption case, the cross-border corruption case going on between Canada and the US. I think Canadians are not enough aware about this. I think Americans need to become more aware of this. We've had talks since Donald Trump has come to office about the problems with the cartels and all of the people dying across the US from the use of these drugs. Canada was accused of being a country that contributed a lot to this. Lots of media came out to say, no, it's not possible, it's not. But it is possible, and it has been possible, and it has been happening. I've got other videos on my channel talking about the super fentanyl drug labs that are here in Canada that are taking drugs down into the US. The fact that Canada is such a large money laundering company for terrorism, Chinese crime, you name it. The cartels, they're here in Canada. But here's the most concerning thing at this point. We've had the Toronto Police Department being investigated with very, very serious allegations that there's deep penetration into the police department with corruption tied to these cartels.
Shell revelation. 8 current and former Toronto Police Force members arrested and charged with feeding information to organized crime groups. Today, the legal journey for 5 of those officers began. Our Shauna Hunt was watching court proceedings.
These shootings caught on camera are alleged examples of some of the intimidation, extortion, and violence carried out in connection to Project Self that led to the arrest of 19 civilians and 7 Toronto police officers. Tuesday was the first court hearing for Sergeants Robert Black, Carl Grillette, and Constable Sarabjit Bedi, Elias Mawad, and John Madley Jr. Some of the allegations these cops are facing include obstructing justice, drug trafficking, accepting bribes, and illegally accessing police databases and leaking the information to suspected criminals.
Let me tell you what happened here. The Toronto Police Department became involved in this when a neighboring police department was doing investigations into organized crime, doing shooting up places. We had tow truck wars, all kinds of extortion. They're looking into it. When what happens but the York Regional Police become aware of a hit being done on a detention center guard.
This is the moment a hit squad rammed a police cruiser in a York Region driveway, aiming for a corrections officer. It's an alleged targeted assassination plot caught on camera. But the real story isn't just the hit. It's how these guys found their target. Investigators say the killers were fed information from inside the Toronto Police Service.
Now, this is more interesting than that. Not just a detention center, but one that has got a massive drug problem with a massive amount of drugs flowing through it. When they looked into it, they found that Toronto police, both active and retired, were involved with this hit in some fashion. Now, these are the allegations. But what came up more is even more stunning. The charges that came out of this, as York Regional Police looked into it, and once again, this is police investigating police here. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. They have come up with charges of bribery, obstruction of justice, breach of trust, unauthorized access and distribution of confidential police information. There's drug trafficking allegations against these officers, theft of personal property allegations, and information leading to the potential hit on this jail guard. There's been houses that have been shot up in terms of intimidation. Now, we don't know if that's because they were trying to collect on drug debts, intimidate, what it is. That information has not come out yet. It's being kept pretty quiet. We also have very troublingly talk of police uniforms being appropriated by these officers who were involved with this organized crime, as the allegations go. Now, what were these uniforms being used for? Imagine someone can go into an airport, anywhere, wearing a full police uniform with what looks like everything authentic, and then start to do things. Like, how much crime could you get into if you're a drug dealer, a cartel guy, and you have access to complete police uniforms. This is very concerning. We haven't even been able to dig into where that went yet because the information isn't forthcoming. It's still before the courts. Let me tell you a little bit about the Ryan Wedding angle. So Ryan Wedding was the Canadian who is being hunted by the U.S. justice system with a reward at first for $10 million to his arrest, then for up to $15 million US towards his arrest, because he was involved in some of the biggest drug dealing going on around the world and across North America. He was very much tied, allegations go, to the cartels in Mexico, where he actually fled to for a while. He's alleged to have put hits out on people himself. All of this is before the courts. It's coming up. But what's most interesting is one of the indicted people, indicted with Ryan Wedding, one of the persons alleged to have moved a lot of his drugs transnationally, that person's name was on the do not contact list for the person involved in this Project South bribery allegations and all of these charges against the police officers. Another person who allegedly was quite the drug mover to Europe and to the US. There's a reason they call it the drug trade, because it goes back and forth, right? Historically, we've had things like marijuana moving to the States for cocaine to come up to Canada and all of that. But there's the rub, where one person removed potentially here from this police investigation being involved in one of the biggest cartel problems that the US has faced. So let's talk about the questions that this raises here. There have been several times over the years, this is not Toronto Police's first brush with allegations about police officers, drug squads, bribery, taking money, and corruption. It's not the first one. There's been several others, some that are still moving through the courts that have not been identified with this Project South. But one has to ask the question, how deep is this investigation going into Project South? York Regional Police is a neighboring police force to Toronto. They have a border right beside each other. They're major crime people, they're drug people, they're homicide people, they're guns and gangs people. They would all be working together like this over the years because, of course, the criminals go across both sides of that street to conduct their crime. So the problem comes up here. Why was not some independent body notified to oversee the investigation as it was going forward? What we do know is the chief of the Toronto Police Force was informed rather quickly about the allegations and what was coming out against his force. Now, many people are questioning that. Why should that chief have been notified? The problem here is there is not an independent body that does criminal investigations. And when I say independent, I mean like a prosecutor, a special prosecutor, an investigation unit that does not work with the police departments that can look into it to make sure that all the leads are run down. I'll tell you what my questions are. Without having that body there, without having one to do it, how do you know that all the leads are being run down or they got snuffed out at a point when they got too hot? We don't know that. I'm speculating. But there is no independent body to say that. Now, Ontario does have one unit called the Special Investigative Unit that is supposed to look at when officers get involved in shootings or hurt somebody badly. They're called in to investigate them. They're above the police. They separate the officers. They take notes. But in this case, there was no one like that overlooking this. No judge, no senior prosecutor, no one to say that what was being done correctly. So how do we know that this investigation is going deep enough? I guess we just have to trust it. But this is the problem when you start looking at corruption with police at a senior level. Certainly in the US, you've just seen it with the passing of Bob Mueller. There's people on both sides of the coin about him. With Comey running the FBI, with Wray in the FBI. There's lots of problems if you have police chiefs or police leaders that aren't being investigated by whom? One of the issues that you have to look at here is how much is this a culture of this particular police department? We see so much of this going on. There's been lots of indications. In fact, what's happened post these allegations being made against the police is there's been calls for independent reviews, if you will, by people who aren't really criminal investigators. They're not allowed to look at criminal conduct by police, to look at everything from the oversight, how all of these officers are managed. There's lots of talk of poor resource management. They're not being proper supervision. Lots of stuff just being let go on the Toronto Police Department. And when that happens, of course, that creates an environment where corruption can come out. I mean, if you got someone watching you very closely, a good supervisor, it's hard for you to commit these crimes. So these questions have been raised, and there's actually a huge investigation going to be done into the oversight, but not really the criminal conduct. That's being left to the York Regional Police to work through. Now, the problem here is whistleblowers. What if we have people that actually knew that a lot of this corruption was going on or suspected it, but they didn't come forward? They didn't come forward because the culture in the police department was if you came forward, you were a troublemaker, and you just might find yourself on the outside. You might find yourself charged with some internal charges to stop your career. You might find yourself transferred off somewhere else. Now, that's a cultural history. That's no surprise to anybody who works on the Toronto Police Department. The police actually had a report done by an independent body for the police board that said that the police are afraid to come forward and talk about problems that they see. In fact, right now, there's a police officer going through several charges of misconduct who did come forward, who did come out to say about problems that he saw with lack of adequate policing, with lack of proper supervision. And he was bringing up some very serious issues. And what happened to him? He got hammered with a bunch of charges for misconduct.
Suggests that these multiple 901s were launched not because of clear misconduct, but right after Haynes voiced concerns about under-resourcing, skyrocketing mental health calls, eating up frontline capacity, and the inability to properly investigate real crime.
A charge like he put on his Instagram, well, he was a community cop, that he raised money to make a little police badge to give to a young child who was suffering from cancer.
Wow. You get your own badge with your own name on it. Okay, and you can pin that right on your shirt. And then that's an official name tag, just like the ones that we wear.
They charged him with being improperly publishing a video of him in uniform, when that was actually the basis of his job. And that's just one of the weak charges against him. Right now, his charges are up. His lawyer has filed an abusive process, alleging that he was being abused by the process of laying these charges against on him for speaking up. So the culture all ties together. And the investigation into this whistleblower is being done by the police himself. And their lawyer is making the argument that the very process he's going through is abusive and not fair. And they're going to a higher court as soon as the ruling comes out from the police department if they're going to stay the charges or not. So therein lies the real rub. If the cops on the inside are the ones allegedly doing all these crimes, looking at info, looking at intel bases, moving uniforms to people, being involved in giving information for hits, drug dealing, all of these allegations, and others inside may know about it, but they're afraid to speak up, you got a real problem. Where's the accountability going to come for this? Who knows? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if the U.S., Cartel, and the FBI get more involved in looking at what's going on up in Canada and looking to see if there's any issues with corruption. That's so far been the best check that Canada has had on oversight, because the bodies are totally lacking here for doing the correct oversight. We don't have the independent bodies to investigate this level of police corruption. And this, of course, strikes right at the heart of public trust, of the administration of justice. So Canada is becoming the Wild West, and I think the U.S. should be aware of it. I've got other videos on my channel talking about some of these issues. Be sure to check them out. If you like the information I'm covering here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow, stay tuned, and I want to hear your comments below about what you think about for accountability and independent investigations so we can have trust in our policing. This is Ross McLean for the McLean Chronicles.